About 17 years after Jesus died, a preacher named Paul makes his way to the city of Corinth to start a church. He'd been a follower of Jesus himself for about 14 years at that point. So about 3 years after Jesus died, Paul became a follower of Jesus, and now he was on a mission to make more disciples. And he goes to Corinth. Now this is interesting because Corinth had a reputation. It was Sin City. It was the ancient Vegas of the known world. But more than that, they were a notably mean people. Nobody liked the Corinthians in the ancient world. So one writer in the ancient world says this. He says, they were a people without grace or charm and not the least convivial. In other words, they're a bunch of rascals. And Paul is like, I'm going to make disciples of Jesus out of those people. Because of course he did. So he goes to Corinth and he starts a church. And this church, at the very beginning, is made up of a really hodgepodge group of people. So it's mostly Gentiles, but some Jews. And it's mostly poor, but some rich. And this is going to be really important in coming weeks as we work throughout the rest of 1 Corinthians, because a lot of what's happening here stems from this. And so they're all coming from all sorts of backgrounds. Most of them were pagans before. Most of them were Gentiles. And so they've got their own practices, they've got their own cultural stuff, they've got their own religions, and they've got their own idea about how this religious thing ought to be done. And worst of all, is that they're picking and choosing their favorite leaders. And it's a huge problem. We know it's a huge problem because Paul spends his first 3 chapters of 1 Corinthians talking about this. These people are dividing themselves according to which leader they follow. And they're creating boundary lines and they're getting angry with one another. And it just starts to fall apart. So Paul is in Ephesus and he's trying to start another church. And he gets a letter from one of the leaders of one of these Corinthian house churches. It's a woman named Chloe. And she writes Paul a letter to tell him what's going on. And he recognizes that they're living life in this blur of selfishness. They're living as if they have not encountered the Spirit of Christ. They're living like animals, even worse than animals, because we know that possums and ocelots don't treat each other like this. And all they care about is winning their arguments and living as they see fit. So Paul sits down with his buddy Sosthenes, and they write a letter in response. And the letter that they write that day is what you and I now have in our Bibles as 1 Corinthians.